Hi, I'm Simone Gower, a graduate student getting my master's in book publishing. This is my podcast, Mental Notes, where I have conversations with authors about mental health representation in young adult novels. In this 6-part series, we'll dive into their real-life experiences with mental health, how it informed the characters in their books, and the insights learned along the way. I hope you enjoy the show, with new episodes coming out every Wednesday.
Hi,
Hello!
how are you?
Good, how are
I'm
you?
pretty good, pretty good. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, of course. I'm so happy that you agreed to be on the podcast. So I'm really excited to have you.
Pleasure. I love talking. I love podcasts. It works out. So, yeah, I appreciate it.
Perfect. Well, again, I'm really happy to have you
Of
on. This is
course.
actually my first episode, the first episode of Mental Notes. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
what an
super
honor. Well,
excited.
thank you.
Yeah, I actually have your book right here.
Oh,
Um, I believe I had said, but I first read it when I was in high school. It was actually a birthday present that my friend had given me right after it came out. So yeah, it was fun to revisit it and get to reread it for this. And
I
yeah,
love when
so
someone got it as a gift. That means a lot to me. So that's really sweet. That's awesome.
well, why don't you just kind of walk me through like how you kind of came up with this story idea and yeah, what led you to highly logical behavior?
Yeah, well, you'll have to forgive me. It's been a minute. I wrote this
Yeah.
book in 2014, 15. It came out in 2016. So I feel like I've lived 3 lifetimes since writing that book. But um, yeah, highly logical behavior was sort of, I had this idea for a few years, um, that was vaguely sort of, you know, about this kid who doesn't leave his house. And it really kind of built from that. That was just the seed of an idea. And then around the time Noggin, my second book, was coming out, I started getting some pretty bad anxiety. I was around 30, and when I turned 30, anxiety got really bad. I was suffering from depression for the first real time in my life, and having pretty bad panic attacks. I have panic disorder, and so that was a really frustrating and painful and confusing experience. And, what always ends up happening, or what ends up happening to a lot of writers, is you start something because you think it's something else, and then you get to the halfway point and you're like, oh, it's about me. Of course it's about me. And so that's kind of what happened with highly logical behavior. Is I had the seed of an idea about an agoraphobic. I was always kind of interested in agoraphobia. My mom had a bit of agoraphobia when I was a kid, and so we talked about it. And then I can remember just kind of seeing different movies and reading different things about agoraphobics and or people with agoraphobia. And so it was just interesting to me. And then when I started suffering from anxiety, and it dawned on me one day, I have this idea, and also I'm kind of isolating myself because of my anxiety. I wasn't full blown suffering from agoraphobia, but I was avoiding socializing. I became a real homebody, and my partner and I would really just not have much of a social life. And that's kind of when it dawned on me, like, oh, I should probably write about this. Like, I think now I understand enough about this feeling and what one of the factors to it might be, that I could maybe write about it. And that's kind of how highly logical behavior came about. Um, and then, Lisa in the story, I love the book and the movie Election, by Tom Perrotta. And, it
Okay.
was a movie with Reese Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick in the early 2000s. And, I think, and she plays a character very much, she's this very hyper ambitious, um, student, and she wants to become the class president of her senior class. And this very popular jock is running against her. And this teacher, basically, because he doesn't want the jock to win, he cheats. and helps her win or something like that. And then it just becomes like this very dark, strange comedy. But the whole thing is sort of about like the dangers of hyper ambition. And it's good to be driven, but when does ambition get the best of you and make you hurt other people? And so that character was kind of born out of inspiration from characters like that, where just I think it's really interesting to explore a person who needs to do so well that they kind of forget themselves on the path to doing that thing. And so
Yes.
Lisa, her it's easy in the book to see her intentions as good, but clearly she has a misunderstanding of what it takes and what it means to be supportive of someone with mental illness, and she learns, and all that. But anyway, that's my very long answer to the book.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I just love the characters in the book in general, but especially Lisa, I feel like you wrote her with such like honesty and just, with all of her flaws, just kind of as, encompassing all of that is really interesting. And then to see even just her development and her growth, realizing, you know, what the right thing to do is. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I appreciate that. She was a really fun character to write, and there's a lot about becoming successful in any kind of business. And when I first came onto the sort of YA book scene, my first book won all these awards, and I was very quickly went from being completely unknown to sort of having at least a small enough or a big enough following to where other authors knew me, and I could go to a book event and be and have a line of people wanting their book signed, and it was very strange. And but it also exposes you to, and then I moved to Hollywood for 5 years, and so or LA, and you're really around there's a lot of pressure to be ambitious, and there's a lot of people like trying their best to give the right attention to the right things and all of that. And so I don't know. I think a lot of that stuff also kind of, I had to several times, if this makes any sense, take a step back and be like, okay, so um let me not get ahead of myself because a few people like my books. Be uh Let me not forget that it takes a lot of hard work to put out another book. Like, I wrote a second book and it wasn't the right book, and I was so kind of very hyper confident about it. And then when it didn't work out, I think it helped me realize, like, oh, you know you still have to work for this.
Yeah.
And I think, Lisa sees an easy way to tell an emotional enough story that she will get something she wants, right? And so I think it was really fun to explore this idea that like a concept or a plan or an ambition, even when it isn't humanized enough, when it's not enough about people or who it affects, it's really easy to maybe do the wrong thing. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that's what Lisa does, because there's a lot of people who read the book and say, "Oh, I did not like Lisa," and I'm always like, "Well, Lisa's probably the most like you, though. Like, Lisa's probably the
Yeah.
most like most of us, I believe. Like, I don't think that means that I just think it means that I'm always going to write characters that screw up, because that's what we all do. And so I
Hmm.
don't, it's typically a compliment to me when people say they don't like a character, because I'm like, okay, so it made you think about it too much. It made you,
Yes.
and that's kind of what I like. And so, um, but yeah, yeah, Lisa was fun.
Yeah, yeah, she definitely had, a hero complex or, kind of savior complex, when it came to wanting to help people. She did want to help people, but she wanted the recognition almost kind of more, at least at the start. So,
Exactly. And it's the broader thing being something I think you touched on in your email was, like, that's not, it's not fixing mental illness is not something
Hmm.
to be fixed, and it's something to be understood, and you support someone dealing with mental illness, and you help them, heal from whatever it is that exacerbates it or makes it worse, or triggers them. But um yeah, I think there's so many people still in like 2025 that I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that it usually really surprises me when I try to talk to people who don't experience mental illness, and I learn how little they know about how it works. Like I've had people, I have like confided in people within the last year saying, oh, well, I, got on a new medicine for my depression and anxiety and PTSD, and I'm feeling good on it. And I've had them say like, oh, I don't know about those meds. And I'm like, but what? Like, I just told you it's helping me. And it's also like not you're you don't know. Like, and so there's
Yeah.
a lot of still misconceptions about mental illness and everything. So it's always something that I talk about and that I'm really vulnerable about, because I wish more people had talked about it when I was young. I had a family that talked about it, and I think that did help me. But overall, I've had it's been a really impactful experience to like, froze for a minute. It was really impactful to tour with Highly Illogical Behavior back in 2016 and go to panels and at festivals talk to kids about mental health, and then Lisa, representing this sort of misconception, or this sort of, it can be an easy fix if you have the right tools. And I don't think
Hmm.
most people who suffer from mental illness would never say there's an easy fix to any of it. It's a pretty tough thing. And it's something a lot of people deal with for their entire lives. And so it's not, people with mental illness are not waiting for saviors. They're waiting for
Yes.
support systems and communities. But yeah, yeah. I will rant, by
Hmm.
the way. You have to just like say, stop talking.
Yeah, I think even in the book, Clark tells Lisa, that it wasn't her job to, fix Solomon, to help him, but really just to kind of be there, as his friend. But um, yeah, and then with Solomon too, it's like, yeah, at the end of the story, he is able to go in the backyard, and he is sort of able to leave the house and the car for that period of time, and he'll get better, but it's gonna take years of therapy, right?
Exactly.
It's not like he meets somebody and, oh, I'm cured now. The last 3 years, it's like they didn't happen.
Exactly. And one thing that I like to say, there's been a lot of people who have asked me over the years, like, you know, why wasn't he in therapy? And I think it's mentioned at the beginning of the story where it's kind of like, none of this worked for me. What
Hmm.
works for me is staying in the house. And what I try to tell people, and the way I think about it is, first of all, his parents and him are not people who do all the right things. That's not how people are. We don't always go to therapy when we need to. We don't always send our kid to therapy when they need to go to therapy. We deal with life how know how to deal with it at the time when we have to deal with it, and the capacity that we have. And so I try to remind people that, remember that these characters are very much grounded in the reality of who people really are. Like we, there's a lot of people that we know who probably would have benefited, most people, from therapy as kids, who had varying degrees of mental illness, or even just, issues that could have been helped, worked through. But that doesn't mean they win. And so I think for me too, as I like to show adults that also don't make, maybe, you know, basically what is told in the story is that, like, they sent him to therapy a lot, and it wasn't working for him, and it was making their son unhappy. And what made him happy was to leave him alone about it and let him feel safe. And what are we not supposed to let them do that as his parents? And so there's very much like it begs for a certain kind of empathetic understanding of these people and how sometimes you do have to choose the thing that you have the capacity to do. And
Hmm.
but what I like to think, and kind of what you hinted at there, is that maybe by the end of it, hopefully a lot of readers pick up on that idea like you did, which is, well, maybe now he'll go. Maybe now that he sees that he can make these steps to get out of the house, maybe now he can see that progress is possible for his condition. And so it's sort of, I try to remind people, like, my job is not to tell all of Solomon's story from his birth to his death.
Right.
My job is to tell this little bit of his story. And so, try not to judge the characters based on the snapshot that I give you. Try not to judge them fully for their mistakes or anything like that. And so I try to, because I've thought a lot about it. I've thought about, should I have put a therapist in it? Should I, you really second guess books when you put them out and people ask certain questions. It's very easy to go back and say, was it irresponsible of me? And I really like to think of it as, again, this is a snapshot. This is something that it's a unique situation. And it's not just the story of him. It's in small part the story of his parents and his grandmother, who just wanted to make sure he wasn't panicking and hitting himself and feeling so sad that he couldn't function and so anxious. And so they gave him the medicine that worked. And so I like to present it as, it sometimes is not as easy as going to therapy or taking medicine.
Right.
It's complicated. And mental illness, the thing that I've learned most about it in talking to people with all sorts of different types of mental illness and varying degrees, is it's so individualized. It's so individualized. And I think that's why there's so much misunderstanding, is because someone without mental illness might know 10 people with mental illness, and they're all talking about it in a different way. And so it makes that person think, I don't know about this, or I don't understand this. And that's because we don't either. you know, we just have to live with it and try to understand it. So I'm glad that you said that.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you inferred that from the ending, which is, maybe Solomon seeing that human connection can help start to uplift him out of the place he's in, could be the road that leads him to getting the kind of therapeutic help that he needs, and
Yes.
I hope that a lot of readers take that hopefulness from the ending. It's hard to know.
Yeah. And I mean, you just mentioned how Solomon says right at the beginning of the story that therapy didn't work for him at the start, and it wasn't something he wanted to do. And I remember my first experience with therapy. It was after my freshman year of college. I knew that I wasn't doing very good. I was kind of on like the verge, the start of having like an eating disorder, and I recognized it enough that I had asked my parents when I went home that summer if I could go to therapy, because I was like, I this isn't good, I need help, but at the same time I didn't want to be there. So that whole summer I would show up to my therapist's office and I'd sit there arms crossed and not give her a whole lot of information.
And it wasn't
And
very
it wasn't
helpful.
even really, yeah,
Yeah,
and it wasn't.
because you weren't ready for it.
And no. So my second time was better. I had a different therapist, and that was when I was then later in college, actually. Um, but then it was still, I wasn't. I felt like we got along really well, but I was still withholding in a lot of
I've
ways.
done it. I did it for
And then
years.
finally, yeah, finally once I graduated and started again, then I went in first session and said, okay, so I've had issues in the past with not being really ready,
Yeah.
or in the mindset to really work through this in therapy. I was like, gonna try and make this change now,
Wow.
and that's kind of where we've been at.
Good for you. You should be so proud of yourself for that, because I'm going to be 42 in a few months, and it took me until this last year where I said something similar to my current therapist. I said, I thought that this stuff that I didn't need to deal with didn't ever need to be brought up with all the therapists I've had for the on and off for the course of 2 decades, and I'm going to not do that with you. I'm going to say everything that comes to mind. I'm going to say everything that I even think, and that has been really, really helpful. Because I always try to tell people, you have to be ready for therapy and you have to be picky. If that means going to 5 therapists, I know that's, and I do want to say that's advice that not everyone can take because of insurance. Oh my gosh, I just hit my computer. Because of insurance or, the availability of psychiatric professionals or, counselors in their area. But if you have the resources, if you have the insurance, that'll do it. If you have Medicaid or whatever, be ready for it, and then be really picky. Bounce from therapist to therapist for 3 months if you need to, because if that person can't, if that person is not someone you feel is the right vibe, honestly, like sometimes it's just about a vibe check with a therapist. Within the first 5 minutes, I think I've always just known like, this is never gonna be super beneficial to me. And that's not to say that that's, I would say give someone a couple of sessions, let them warm up. A lot of times people judge the first therapy appointment and I'm like, well, that's just an info dumping appointment. You can't, you've got to go a couple times. They are their most technical on the first time probably because they just need to figure out who you are a little bit. But yeah, be picky. Be picky. They're helping you deal with something major. Be picky about who's doing that. And I think when it comes to kids, it's harder to be picky about it, right? Because a lot of parents have gone to trouble to get this appointment. They've waited. They know this person's good because their friends said it helped their kid, and kids don't have as much autonomy in that decision making. But yeah, I mean, kudos to you though, like truly for knowing at such a young age that this isn't going to help me unless I'm as vulnerable as I need to be to my counselor, because that's the only way. And when you start doing that and opening up, I bet what you've found is it gets easier and easier. Yeah. That's what I found. Is I just go in now and I just say whatever I'm thinking, and I'm like, because you learn that it's a non-judgment zone. If it's the right counselor, right? You learn that, oh, I'm not going to be judged for this. No matter what I say about how I feel, I may not be totally understood, but this person's going to listen to me. And I think there's just so much benefit in that. Sometimes my therapist doesn't say anything and I learn a ton just because I said it out loud.
Yep.
And I bet you have that experience. And there's something really, there's so much right now about like our brain is really powered by our script, right? Like our internal script, but also like what we say, like how we, I try to like talk in the mirror and stuff and say like, hey, you got this. Yesterday was tough, but you got today, and like little things like that teach our brain to look for more positive things than more negative things. And it kind of helps. But yeah.
Yeah. Therapy. It's great. It's a great thing. I wondered, so it's been, about 10-ish years since you wrote the book. Do you feel, how do you feel like the stigma, there still is stigma in general around mental health, but how do you feel it's changed, like, as far as like people going to therapy or being more open about just, that option?
I can only speak to the circles that I, am exposed to. But I feel like it's something that has really progressed in positive ways. I do feel like I hear more people bring up their therapist. Even, I like podcasts. I like TV show. I feel like I hear it more from like, I listen to Conan O'Brien's podcast. He mentions going to therapy all the time. And I think things like that are different from 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago, really famous people didn't talk so much, or really people who like well-known people, they weren't so open and vulnerable about like struggling, because there was more of a, we keep up this veneer of success and stability so that you will tune in. And I think it's become less of a for lack of a better term, I think doing that makes it less of a bummer to bring it up to people who might perceive it as a bummer, which they shouldn't. But I think
Right.
it talking about it and more people talking about it, of course, is what removes that stigma. And sometimes that stigma is just that people avoid talking about something they don't understand. And so I think it's nice to have seen sort of, at least from my perspective, to have seen a lot of like progress in the greater zeitgeist of sort of just different people bringing it up, and even in social circles. Like I know for me that I've been around a lot of people who have just, casually bring up therapy or casually bring up
Mhm.
their meds. And so I think it is something, and I think social media, for all of its evils and detriment to democracy and society currently, um, I think that it has connected a lot of people on in this idea where, like, it didn't really feel like there was a mental illness community before in a lot of ways. And
Mhm.
now I feel like there's a lot of people trying to create resources or creating resources and sharing advice and tips and all those things. And I think that is something that I did not see as much 10 years ago. You know, I also just think that, again, it's sort of like, it's hard for me to know, because 10 years ago I was 30 and now I'm not. I'm 41. So like, um I don't know if young people experience that same thing. But what I see online, at least, is very much that Gen Z very much embraces, like, embraces the erasure of those kind of stigmas and really pushes for there to be vulnerable and open discussion of whatever someone is dealing with, and in a non-judgmental and really accepting way. And I think that's the big difference. Is I think millennials like myself, I think we really we really try to be non-judgmental, but I think there's a lot of Gen X still influence, still kind of like, there's a cynicism that Gen X, in my opinion, that I have Gen X siblings, and there's a little bit of like a, not to judge all Gen Xers, and this is not to paint a broad stroke on anyone or of anyone, but to me, there's sort of a cynicism that millennials have to fight with. And I think that my experience of Gen Z is that, sure, they can be cynical. It's in a way that only judges people that are doing bad, I guess,
Yeah.
is my
Yeah.
experience of it, instead of people who are struggling. Like I would expect a Gen Zer to, like, if there was a room full of people talking and someone said something really awful to someone, I would expect the Gen Zer to speak up before the millennial or the Gen Xer. You know what I mean? And I think that
Yeah.
that kind of mindset is what aids the progress of things like removing the stigma of mental illness and things like that. Because, and it's certainly the same with like body positivity and things like that. Like I've seen Gen Zers be more willing to, you know, say something when someone's body has been, judged or objectified in a certain setting or something like that, or something inappropriate has been said. Um, and yeah, I just think that there's more of a, well, I also just think there's more courage to speak out. I think Gen Z, I'm assuming you're a Gen Zer. Yeah.
Yes.
So what you were the benefit of being born into a generation where you could get on a phone or a computer and have a voice really young. Um, I think has taught a lot of you to be very brave with those voices and very, like, sort of unashamed or not holding back when it comes to, like, no, I'm not going to take this kind of behavior. No, I'm not going to take that kind of behavior. And no, hey, I'm going to call you. I think calling out is something that my generation still struggles with a bit, because we toggle between people who are really good at it and people who didn't teach us to be so great at it. And so, anyway, I've offended everyone. So, except Gen Z. I love Gen Z, by the way. You can tell, right? I'm jealous. Oh. I think Gen Z is more liberated in thinking, and that leads to taking actions and speaking up for causes and things. I see to me, that progress is aided so much by Gen Z's mindset and the progress that they care about.
But yeah, no, I love that take, and I definitely agree. It seems like, as you kind of go down the line with generations, it seems more, um, yeah, just kind of like bold maybe in what, willing to say and talk about and discuss, so
Yeah, and you know, part of that is just, I am certain part of that is a product of just current culture, and that there's the necessity for that kind of boldness. Um, and sadly, you know, your generation hasn't really, you guys haven't, since coming of age, you all have not gotten to experience a time of like chillness in the culture. You know what I mean? And I don't mean to say there's ever been that kind of time, but there's been times when, like, you know, I can remember after Obama won in 2008, nobody paid attention to politics anymore or would anything happen because everyone was just like, everything's fine now. Then, or no one on, you know, at least like no one progressive. And then that really backfired, right? Because people weren't paying attention. And so I think um you all have had to just witness so many major events back to back to back, and so many strange cultural wars, and so many things that speaking up is such a necessity for your cultural sort of identity and survival, it seems like. And which I'm very glad for, because it inspires older people like me who, you know, I wasn't that brave when I was young. I mean, I was pretty bold. I was opinionated, and I definitely didn't hide what I felt. But um, yeah, there's a passion there for progress, um, and I just really like the non-judgment of it all. I don't know. Like, I find that the Gen Zers who I know approach people without as much judgment as I think older generations do, and I think that helps with the mental illness stuff, certainly, you know.
yeah, and I feel like it's especially, like, helpful because of just everything that, like, has been going on, like, just in the world in general.
Strange times.
Very strange,
I
very
you know,
strange.
it's a very it it would be an understatement to say that our current situation does not impact people with mental illness in a very powerful way, and because it impacts everyone in a powerful way. And so I think this is an especially wise and responsible and bold time to do something like you're doing with this podcast, which is um, putting forth conversations about mental health and mental illness, so that people can think more about it and talk about it, and find, you know, empathy is the only thing that can help us. Like, that's the root of all of it, is if we don't figure out how to create and sustain a kind of cultural empathy that allows us all to coexist, then oof, you know, it's going to be rough. And I
Yes.
love that you know, with a with a focus on fiction, or any kind of, right, you know, fiction teaches empathy better than anything. That's what most people agree, is we
Mhm.
can learn to put ourselves in other people's shoes easier through fiction than we can almost any other route. And so it's really important, you know, it's really important. That's why it takes me a decade to write a book.
Yeah, it's definitely fun with fiction, being able to, like you said, put yourself in other people's shoes and really, um, pinpoint the parts of each character that you might relate with,
Exactly.
without, you know, it with it not being, a true story, you don't have, kind of like that almost like barrier, that might like stop you from doing that a little bit.
I agree.
in my opinion. But
No, I totally agree. And part of that is why I love writing young adult fiction, because I feel like teenagers and young adults are more, I mean, biologically more prone to, growth and learning and developing still as people, but also empathy wise. I think that, you know, I think a teenager is much more willing to consider deeply who they are and who they want to be than a lot of adults are comfortable doing. And so I often get a lot of you'll learn that a lot of YA writers get asked, when are you going to write an adult book? And it's almost like you're being asked, when will you get a promotion? And that doesn't make sense to me. I don't, I just always say, if I have an adult idea, like if I have an idea that doesn't involve teenagers, I might write that story. But there's not, to me, young adult books are more important than adult fiction books. I think all books are great and important, but I would rather I would rather have that kind of impact on younger people when it is most important,
yes.
when it matters more. And a teenager remembers most of the books they read when they're teenagers. And then you grow up
Hmm.
and you read a lot of books and you start forgetting a lot of them. But you always remember those books you read when you were young, and that sort of informed how you looked at the world and who you wanted to be. And that's why I think it's really important for me to, with a book like Highly Illogical Behavior, it became, I didn't know that I would ever write about mental illness. And then when I started doing it, it became very important to get it right. Because I thought, you know, maybe there will be kids like Solomon who remember this book as they turn into adults and as they go into adulthood, and maybe that can matter. And so it's a very, that is where my boldness comes in, maybe. And I don't know that it's a bold thing to do. I guess I just mean to say that even when I'm not sure what to say, or, I can share a million things about how I feel on Instagram or Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever, Facebook. I can do that all day, but I know that the reason why I always get like this when someone says, "Are you going to write an adult book?" is like, "Oh no, because this is where I found that there can be an impact made,
Hmm.
and that my voice can in some ways maybe help that." And so that's kind of why I'm glad that there's a lot of books. When this book came out, there weren't as many books about mental illness and young people with mental illness, but I think that has greatly improved. And that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Because it's so individual, and I only have the story that was inspired by my experience with mental illness. And if that connects to certain people, that's great. It won't connect to everyone, and I'm glad that there are books that will. So I would say that's a big
Yeah.
difference too in the last decade, for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've also, just as a reader, noticed a lot more books. Yeah, either just dealing with mental health like as a subject, or even just having more like incidental mental health. Where the characters, might have some sort of mental illness, but it's not the focus of the
Yeah,
plot. So yeah, it's been interesting kind of seeing that shift a little bit more too.
totally. Yeah, absolutely. And even, you know, in the book that I have just turned in after so many years, which will be my fourth, I wouldn't say that's what it's about, but there are characters that have different, you know, aspects of mental illness, or it it's almost impossible for me not to write characters like that, because that's my understanding of the world. And so
Hmm.
that's the only way I know how to process the world and relationships and all that. And so yeah, I think it's inevitable that I'll always kind of have characters that either have some sort of neurodivergent or some sort of mental illness, because that's all I got. That's how I relate. And so hopefully someone relates to the characters that way.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel like, you were kind of saying, like, teenagers, it's such an important time in people's lives, like, where they're really just kind of forming their identity or just really trying to figure out who they are, and I feel like reading, like, through books is, like, a really strong way that they do, like, when they're able to kind of relate to those characters, see themselves in those characters, make them maybe understand themselves a little bit better, by seeing what the characters have to go through or just how they are, how they interact. Yeah, I think like I completely agree with you there that it's really important and um yeah, especially if, when teenagers are dealing with mental illness, or anything like that, I think it's really great for them to be able to have characters like them that
Yes,
they see.
absolutely. And I think the same can be said for a character like Lisa, who isn't particularly suffering from the kind of mental illness that Solomon is. She's certainly got some behaviors that are not great, but or that are not easy to deal with. But I think even in that character, like maybe the way I look at fiction is and the reason I wanted to write when I was young is the way that the books I loved made me feel was, oh, I'm not the only person who thinks this way. And so I'm not as alone on this planet because I thought I was kind of an alien. Thought I didn't come from here because no one thinks like this. And it's really
Yeah.
comforting when you meet a character or characters who think even a little like you, if you feel really alone. And as we know, like loneliness is an epidemic.
Mhm.
And it is worse for you than several packs of cigarettes a day. And that it is worse for your health and your livelihood. And so anything in this world that can make anyone feel less lonely, that to me is that's impact, and that's something worth really trying to get right and really really working hard on. And those are the best emails I get. I don't get a ton of fan mail. I'm not a bestseller or anything, but about once a month I might get a fan mail, and it from anywhere in the world, and it's just someone saying that one of my books made them feel less alone. A lot of them are that, and that's all I need in the whole world. That makes me feel less alone. So it's this cycle, which is like, oh well, I'm really glad they sent it because today I was feeling pretty extraterrestrial, and now I feel like there's a reason. And so it's all this. There's a weird cosmic thing to it where we're all interconnected. We're all the same. We're all the same very confused species trying to figure out why we're here and what to do with ourselves. And um, it's really great when someone can wink from you from across the world and say like, I know too. Like I get it. That's a great feeling. It's a great feeling. And to do that, to write a book with the idea in mind that that's what I want to happen, very difficult. But but it makes me take it very seriously. And I have a lot of fun with it, of course. Uh, but I take it really seriously. And it takes a really long time sometimes because I'm not gonna do it wrong. I just can't. It doesn't have to be perfect for
Yeah.
everyone. It doesn't have to be everyone's cup of tea. It doesn't have to be everyone's favorite book. But especially when talking about these kinds of things. And I think with adult fiction, to make that comparison again for no reason at all, but I think it doesn't need to get it as right because there's not as heavy of a responsibility on how it will affect the reader. That's kind of how I feel about it. So, yeah. So I think writing for adult books would be a demotion for me. And no, I'm just kidding. No, and I may very well do it someday if I have a good idea. And so I try to always say that, but
Yeah. Another character in the book that I guess there's only a handful of characters, but Clark, I really loved his character. And I feel like he's just such a good friend to Solomon. And he's kind of, subversive in, like, his stereotypes too, he's, like, this, like, attractive, like, jock, but, he's also, like, a nerd, and kind of geeky and just really caring and thoughtful. Um, I feel like on the surface, you'd expect him to kind of be more, like, nonchalant, like, not really care about a whole lot, but he really does care about his friends, and I feel like for people reading this book who maybe, again, don't necessarily feel like anxiety or, struggle in the same ways that, like, Solomon does, they can at least read the book and see Clark, and learn how to be a good friend or good support to somebody going through that, like, by reading Clark.
Well, that's nice to hear. Yeah, I love Clark. Clark is a great. He's a good guy, and Clark is very much for me like in my first book. There's a best friend character who is also kind of like everyone just expects him to be like a good looking guy in high school and who has too many girlfriends and he ends up being like one of the most sensitive characters in that whole book. Um, and I think with Clark, it was a little bit of a continued exploration of that. And I, when I was young, I never had close male friends. I was not close with my older brother either, and so I do typically write. You know, I sometimes will write things that I am fascinated by because I haven't gotten to experience it in the same way. And so I want to explore what that might feel like. And so Clark is that kind of character where, I kind of imagined myself in the closet in high school and what would that feeling be like if suddenly this very attractive and very kind guy started hanging out with me and he wants to swim in my pool and hang out and play games all the time. And it would be difficult not to want it to be something else.
Mhm.
Just because of the situation and just because of, he's charming and kind and handsome. And I, I also just think that like a universal experience that I have observed in a lot of gay men and women is um that crush you have on the straight friend that you can't really do much about. And that kind of is torturous until you know for sure who they are and what they want. And that's uncomfortable and it makes for awkward situations. And sometimes the friend is not like Clark. And that's a sad situation for people. And so
Mm.
maybe it also could be a way to inform a straight guy how to be friends with a gay guy who
Yeah.
has complicated feelings around getting to spend that much time with another guy because of just the whole way that society and culture, try to put us all in a little box and tell us what kind of friendships we can have. Some of my best friendships as an adult are with straight men, um, as an adult gay man. But when I was young, I really could have benefited from that. Um, I had male friends, but there was never anything that was soulful or
Yeah.
sensitive or
Close.
close or, like, and I always envied that. And I envied it in my first book. I kind of write about it between siblings as well. There's a missing younger brother and these two friends, are trying to sort of find him. And I don't know. It's just something that's really fascinating to me. And Clark is sort of a continuation of that, of exploring that in someone. And I, of course, made it manipulatively confusing because he's kind of being a little bit vague with Lisa, and we don't know Clark. We don't know what Clark could be asexual. A lot of people have asked if Clark is asexual. He could be. I don't know. I only told that snapshot, so I don't really know past what I wrote. And so, um, but I think it could just be that like people are very nuanced and want different
Hmm.
things at different times. And um yeah, so it was a fun character to write. And there needed to be someone to in that story, there needed to be someone to remind us that Lisa is not just a force for bad. Like, Clark and Lisa have some issues, but he's still there and he still cares
Hmm.
about her and loves her.
Right.
And I think that grounding, making sure she, tethering him to her or her to him humanizes her in a lot of ways when there's certain parts of the certain times in the story where we really want to be mad at her or we really want to not like her or think that she's just so terrible she can't be redeemed because of what she's doing. But we have to remember that she's a kid.
Hmm.
and
Yes.
one thing she has got right is that she surrounds herself with people like Clark and Solomon. And even through her mistake, she's put the right people in her life and there's something there. And so yeah, Clark was really fun. Clark, people love Clark. And it's such a likable name, Clark Kent. That's why I named him that. No one assumes Clark Kent is as great as he is, the superhero, but he is. But he's just
Yeah.
normal Clark. And so it was really fun to write that character.
Yeah. And I think, you know, Clark and Lisa, are seemingly together at the end of the story, but they're together throughout the book. And I think by having Solomon be gay and then have him, not have a relationship with Lisa, and instead it really just kind of focusing on like the friendship of the three of them. I think that I don't know. I feel like it's really it just shows us, just how important like friendship is. And just like that connection. I feel like in some ways people will kind of romanticize mental illness where it's like, oh, once you fall in love, like you get better, like you're fixed. So kind of removing that element, at least from like Solomon being in a relationship with somebody, I think more points to the fact that having a strong support system in your friends can be just as beneficial for your mental health. But again, it's not a fix. But yeah, I just really love that connectivity that they all have together.
Well, you're spot on. I think something I've learned even recently in life, I'm off of a breakup 2 months now. I just had a pretty big breakup after about a year and a half together. And something that I've learned is that, not that I've remembered. Something I've remembered is, I tend to put a lot of my emotional focus and energy into my romantic relationships, and it pulls away from my friendships. And then when that romantic relationship doesn't work out, I'm feeling a little bit lost in the friendship department. And as someone who's been an author who's moved around a lot and toured, I have a lot of friends. They're just all over the country. They're not in one place as a community.
Yeah.
And I'm not currently touring. I'm not seeing them at festivals. I've also, I lived in LA for 5 years. I don't see any of those friends anymore. Talk to them sometimes. Lived in Fayetteville for a year and a half. Had to leave all of them. And so there is this thing where recently I've really reminded myself, and it's impacted my writing, but I can't tell you much about that because I it's a book I'm not announcing yet. But you can have the scoop when I do. But it really did remind me that, like, romantic love is not the thing that saves us and makes us who we are. Love can be that thing, but it's not just romantic love. It's
Right.
remembering that I've really learned the value of community. Um, because I feel like I've experienced becoming part of a new one and losing it a little bit, and then becoming part of another one and then losing it a little bit, just from geography, just from romantic relationships busting up. Some friends go that way and some friends go, and just the way life works out. And um so I'm actually, like, really determined in this current moment of my life to really value and seek out meaningful, impactful friendships that Um, and and making sure that those are fostered and taken care of and given the kind of care and attention that we so often get really caught up in our romantic relationships and really lost. And I'm very guilty of having done that with at least two of my long-term relationships, is just kind of like putting blinders up to everyone else, and not ignoring people so much as just not giving the time and investment, because this relationship is what fuels my emotional energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what that does. Is it puts too much pressure on your partner to be your
Yes.
strength and your support and your socializing and your social sort of support system. And it also, you accidentally push people away because they think, oh well, they don't need me anymore. Or And so it's an interesting thing. I'm still, I'm in all these years after being really aware of that in books like Highly Illogical and stuff. It's still something that's easy to forget, because we do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look what we're inundated with in so many stories from the time we're very young, is like your long lost love is the thing that makes your heart complete. It makes you,
Yeah.
people say your other half. And what you have to realize is that's no, no, no. We are not half people without another person. We are whole people who need to be part of a diverse and varied and nuanced kind of community of people who can love and support us, not let a romantic relationship shoulder the weight of all of our human complexity and needs and wants. And maybe, just maybe, I'll remember it for the next boyfriend. But it's something that I'm going to be vulnerable about and talk about, because it's a lesson I got to learn. Again, got to be reminded. And you said it so well, which is, you know highly logical behavior I was never gonna get them together at the end. That was never going, like, I never in my mind were Clark and Solomon, because what mattered more to me was that this kid doesn't need someone who falls in love with him romantically to come save him. He needs to be reminded by people who love him as friends that he can save himself.
Yes.
And we forget we can save ourselves sometimes. We forget we can't, we have to. We are the only ones. Just like with the therapy thing. If you're not ready, it takes you, not just the
Mm-hmm.
therapist. You got to be part of it. You're an equal part of it. And so that's such a big part of that story, which is like, your, Cupid did not shoot an arrow at the person who is supposed to come and make your life complete and meaningful. Um, Cupid shot that arrow right into you. And you love yourself, and you fight for yourself, and that is what makes you ready to love the way you need to love other people, and support them the way you need to, without there being sort of a imbalance in a way that you know pushes or pulls people away, or pushes people away, or whatever. So yeah,
Right.
just a lot of stuff to, you know you never stop learning, they say, and I certainly don't.
Never stop
Never stop
learning.
learning. Yeah.
Well, I think that's about time.
Gosh, I could
Do
talk
you have
forever.
any other thoughts that you'd kind of like to share throughout there?
Gosh, I'm so honored to be on the first episode. That's really fun. And this is great. I'm excited. I'm excited for your podcast, and congratulations. This is a really good conversation. I think, for me, I spent the first 30 years of my life being really concerned that I would have the kind of depression or anxiety that I had seen in my family. And then when it happened, the shame of it really surprised me. It surprised me how much I wanted to hide it from people. And what writing about it has done, and what talking to other authors, what talking to readers about mental illness has done, is I do not feel any kind of shame about being someone who has mental illness at all. And that allows me to approach it even when it's really bad. It allows me to have the perspective of looking at it and not judging myself for going through something. Because guilt and judgment on top of mental illness, that's almost so much weight you can't move yourself and you can't move
Yeah.
forward. And so what you're doing by highlighting the discussion of mental illness is big, and it's important, and it's necessary, because every new conversation that someone hears or is part of about the complicated, confusing, but also beautiful and unique way that is just, you're putting out little webs of understanding that attach to other ones and that create this whole, you're part of that network of um of empathy, really. So it's a beautiful thing, and I'm glad you're doing it. So congrats. I'm excited to be part of
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Yes, happy to have you part of it.
Yay. Well, thank you.
Yes, you have a good week.
All right. Bye, Simone. See ya.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Great discussion.
If you or a loved one is affected by anything discussed in this episode or struggling with mental health in general, know there is always help. You can call or text the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 or visit 988lifeline.org. For the National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline, call 1-800-950-NAMI or visit nami.org. You can also download the Not Okay app at notokayapp.com. The app will notify your trusted contacts in case of a crisis.